Hello, insiders, and welcome to this new episode of the EU Bubble Insider. Today, our guest is Álvaro de la Cruz, Head of Communications at FIGIEFA and communications expert. Álvaro, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hi, Krzysztof. Pleasure's mine.
So, I would like to start with asking you to reflect a bit on your career so far. I'm sure there have been pivotal moments that led you to the role you are in today. Just to give our listeners some background, you worked, your career started in Spain. You worked a lot in Madrid, but you also worked in the US, in San Francisco, and now you're in Brussels in the EU bubble. What is the underlying passion that led you to where you are today, and what keeps you committed to the work you do?
So, just to clarify, my experience in San Francisco is a little bit testimonial because I was in charge of the European Institute of Technology's communication for the hub we had in San Francisco. So I went every year, but I was still based in Europe most of the time. So, yeah, working for the US, especially with venture capitals and startups, but mostly from Europe. So yeah, no, what led to where I am today is well, first of all, I've always been passionate about the European Union and everything related to it. I was this first generation of Spaniards that were born. I was born actually in '86, the year Spain joined both NATO and the EU. So for me and my co-millennials and after generations, the EU has always been there. So for us, it was only normal to see the EU flag in every official building, to have the European Union as one layer of administration, logical layer of administration of your country. So of course we that has two sides of the coin. First, that you give for granted stuff that you have that other countries in Europe didn't, and that, as we saw, it's not for granted. And but on the other hand, it makes only natural and I guess in Spain in particular, I think Spain is one of the biggest success cases of integration in the European Union from where we were in '86, just roughly 10 years after the death of our dictator, to where we were a couple of decades after the integration. Spain went from being really below most European economies to be one of the leaders in both development, in industrialization, in services, and also in legislation for all kind of social issues. So, of course, Spain and Spaniards are one amongst the most pro-Europeans in the Union. And me particularly, I was being passionate. I started traveling soon, doing exchanges in France. And yeah, to me, it was always something really intriguing and incredible that with centuries of war behind us and different languages and cultures, now we were actually one political unity. And yeah, I studied Union affairs. I did my Erasmus in Strasbourg, my internship in the European Parliament there. I mean, since ever. And when you're in political science, and when I was already a teenager into political sciences and politics, my favorite show was The West Wing, and I always wanted to work in something like that. And the most similar place for a non-American is actually Brussels. That's our Washington D.C. and hopefully I'm still in time to get that dream job working in the West Wing of Berlimon. Who knows?
I think that yeah, this is a common experience, and I'm sure that many listeners will also relate to West Wing as the show that we've all watched back then. But yeah, and now you're this path led you to being the head of communications of FIGIEFA. Quite big organization, I would say. Could you tell us a bit more about what FIGIEFA does, how many members you have, and what is your role within this organization?
Sure. So I joined FIGIEFA last October. FIGIEFA is the political federation of all of the wholesalers and distributors of spare parts, automotive spare parts in Europe. Not only the European Union, we have also members in countries like Turkey, Norway, Switzerland, or the UK. We have 19 national associations represented by FIGIEFA in Brussels, plus uh, a few international trade groups um, that represent in total roughly 30,000 companies. Of course, many of them are SMEs, family businesses. Some of them are big groups, but combined, indeed, they represent a huge and very active industry, very profitable and very anchored to many European regions and sectors because, of course, it is the car is one of the biggest consumer goods in Europe. On average, every family owns at least a car in Europe, so everybody eventually needs repairing and spare parts for their cars. So we represent the interest of these businesses that we can compete in a fair competition system, that there is a level playing field when it comes to stuff like access to data, design protection, that we can contribute to the green objectives of the European Commission, and so on and so forth. So it's a fascinating environment. You get to work closely with real businesses and real families, like have to handle real decisions that affect their logistics, packaging, distribution, uh, transportation costs, energy costs every day. So for them, most of the time, European legislation, even national legislation, but especially European legislation, represents roughly three quarters of what the legislation that affects them. It's quite far away, so it's great to work with them, represent their interests, and explain to them actually what is happening, what are the trends ahead, and yeah, one of my biggest roles as head of communications is internal communications, to engage with the members, to not only explain to them what we do here in Brussels, but also gather as much evidence, information, trends, and use cases from the different national markets to build up actually position papers and position um, common positions from our members when we don't to go talk to policymakers here in Brussels and be able to really know what's the deal in every single market and yeah, it's very nice. Then of course I support the advocacy activity of our policy team, and we have external communications. But when it comes to trade associations, I think pure external communications play a little less of a big role than in other organizations, especially in institutional communication. It's still important, of course, but to me, it's very important to engage with members bidirectionally and also support their lobbying activities with some more traditional communication, let's say.
My experience with working with various associations is that the most important part of the entire process in doing any type of campaigns is getting everyone on board. You mentioned internal communications, that it's a big part of your job. Is it also your how does this look from your perspective? How important is actually getting all members on board in uh, the process of launching a campaign, achieving the campaign goals?
Well, it is, of course, capital because we are a small team of people working here in Brussels representing their interests. But we have a huge network when you combine the people working in the national associations and, of course, the corporates they represent with, of course, sometimes conflicted interests in the sense that some companies actually compete with each other for the market shares, but at the end of the day, the challenges they face are the same, and we really need to join forces, not only because, as I said, many SMEs individually are not strong, but 30,000 SMEs and the hundred thousands of direct jobs that we generate in Europe, and the GDP part what we generate in, especially in some markets in Europe, is huge, and also because a big part of the policy making uh, process here is done also with member states, and we need them to address the different national governments and ministries and actually bring them to our cause. So it's capital. I think for trade associations, it's very difficult to operate without the cooperation and coordinated action of its networks, their networks.
And before you joined FIGIEFA, you worked for the Martens Centre, which is
Yes.
one of the leading political think tanks in the Brussels bubble. And I think that you can say that you can't get any closer to actual policy making than working for a think tank of one of the major political parties and political groups in Europe. How did this shape your approach to policy making, to policy communications? What did you learn from this experience?
Well, a lot, because as you said, the Martens Centre is the biggest political think tank in Brussels, and it has again also a huge network of political foundations across the member states that count, among others, titans like such as the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. So there's dozens and dozens and hundreds of people behind the content they coordinate, either co-author or publish themselves. There's a lot of talented people. There's people from the same political family, but from all 27 members. That is the only political family that has representation in all the EU member states as of today. So it's really an enriching experience, and they work with, of course, the biggest political group in the parliament, the biggest amount of commissioners in the commission, the biggest amount of seats in the council. So of course it's always an advantage when you work in politics with a bigger fish. Of course, it doesn't mean that smaller groups and parties don't produce really important political inputs, but of course they're limited by their own resources. So that's one of the biggest advantages of working for the EPP wider family. And the Martin Center is a great contributor for yeah. No, one of the things that lacks a lot, I think, in most European countries, and certainly as well a little bit in the European Union, is political well, evaluation of policies, like independent evaluation post policies. So, one of the dangers of being driven by ideological and not scientific standards is that you might implement policies just because you believe in them, even when they don't work. So I think one of the best things you can do is, of course, audit them, and actually have independent professionals validate their outcome. And one of the alternatives to that, if it is not happening or not enough, is actually to bring the scientists, the experts, to actually do the research, the necessary research in advance, to provide political parties with data-driven, science-based proposals, and not just, hey, I believe this tax reform is good because my ideological, whatever, conceptual belief is that this is good. No, I have a good team of experts in science, social scientists, having developed a good approach based on facts, based on research, and the Martin Center is one of the best doing that. So that's great, because that actually makes you avoid to allows you to avoid losing lots of time and public resources in delivering policies that actually you don't know if they will work, even though you believe they're good. Sometimes you need to be more pragmatical and do things that work, even if it's not necessarily what your original beliefs tell you is good.
So having the right data to present to lawmakers is a great advantage. But then the question is, and this is actually one of my favorite questions I ask guests of this podcast series, it's about how to present data that is often very complicated, very industry specific. It can be mining industry data, it can be chemical industry data, or in your case automotive industry. So we're talking about car parts, we're talking about data in cars, which is on its own an industry that it can take a lifetime to understand. what's your perspective? How did you so far manage to present complex issues uh, to stakeholders, to lawmakers you want to influence using the data you have?
But that's the thing. The one of the problems with communication specialists or comes geeks like me or you is that we sometimes tend to want to transform our content into mainstream campaigns, and that's not how this business works. You need to identify which is actually your audience and adapt to it, because sometimes you would like it to be like a best-selling album, and it is not the case. Sometimes this is not meant to be for the mainstream audience or even to a wide audience. So first of all, identify who you're talking to and who you want actually to convey the message to. It's then of course sometimes it's better just to go have coffee in Place Luxembourg with some policymakers. Sometimes it's actually a nice infographic or a nice video. It depends, of course, on the content. And when you talk to policymakers, also is a huge differentiation between, for example, technical people, bureaucrats, for example, the people drafting proposals in the commission, who would actually have appetite for use cases and technical analysis and more dense uh, dense pre-work, and then of course you go meet with MEPs and you need to enter the terrain. You need to think what interests their voters, which is what interests them at the end of the day. So they want facts and figures about very visually presented, so they can easily theorize and use to know what actually the contribution of this industry to their constituency. What is the economical and societal added value that we bring to their region in southern France? I'm just making an example. How many jobs are directly implicated? What would be the risk of having this industry being relocated? So you need to adapt the message, and sometimes it's very visual, very to the point. Sometimes you need a more technical analysis that you can accompany with a nice summary video. But you need to understand it and not, and as we tend to do, avoid to think this is the main readers of the Washington Post that you're addressing. No, it's sometimes very niche audiences or a little bit wider, but not necessarily super wide. So yeah, that's always a tricky thing to find a nice balance between those two worlds. And but you need to really understand who is the audience and adapt. And then of course sometimes it works better than other, and you need to learn and adapt and try and error, and eventually you get the how things work best in this city.
So, how important would you say is the process of narrowing down your target audience? And if you could share some insights on how you actually approach that in terms of even numbers, when you think of your targets of your actions, you think of hundreds of people, you think of, I don't know, 50 people, or maybe 5 people. What's your perspective on this?
I had the great opportunity of being involved in the first ever micro-segmented campaign in Spanish politics ever. This was 2016-17, and this is a phenomenon that is only gonna grow bigger and bigger. So I think it is capital to not only identify which is your audience, but also adapt the appetite of your audience with the right content. Not only using the right platform to communicate with them, but also the right content, the right tonality, the right sometimes language. That is one of the biggest issues with political or policy communication. Communicating policies in the European Union. That in the bubble here in Brussels and in some of the Nordic capitals, English might work very well, but when you go a little bit south or a little bit east, depending on the country, English is no longer useful. So yeah, you need to adapt, and depending on which kind of campaign and which kind of um, which kind of objective you're having for that campaign, you need to go for a massive multi-channel campaign, including social media in different languages, and sponsor content and videos, and sometimes it's a good paper with a couple of infographics and a meeting with a few MEPs in a room. And so it's difficult also to measure because sometimes quantitative results don't mean anything. So sometimes you have lots of viewers or lots of impressions, and that doesn't create an impact. So it's rather sometimes it's easier to know whether your campaign was successful when you have a meeting with an economy ministry of Germany, and then they say, yeah, we're going to support your position in the council because this and this and that, and then hey, easily recognizable, successful campaign. But when you are, for example, trying to convey civil society, NGOs, or the stakeholders through social media and media and so on, uh, okay, you had a lot of retweets and good positive comments and so on, but will that help? It's a little bit more vague, but you need all of them. If I learned something is that nothing is presentable, and everything counts, and especially when you want to do wider campaigns. If not, you rather use your time and resources to go for these couple of dozen people that you really need to impact.
So, if you could dig a bit deeper into it, if the quantitative ways of measuring results don't work that well, and if you also sometimes deal with campaigns that can take a very long time, even 2 or 3 years, how do you know when you've done a good job? How do you, what is the way to measure if a campaign has been successful or not?
Well, for me, particularly now, depending on the area of work among my responsibilities, I can determine that the job was well done. For example, in internal communications, if our members receive, understand, and engage with a policy briefing or a campaign, or participate and engage with their different national governments, and really inform their members, and that's a successful campaign. If it is vis-a-vis a policymaker, well, you know that you were successful if they take in your recommendations or present your amendments to a proposal in the committee in the parliament, or take into the consideration this or that, or submit your position paper. Sometimes there's public consultations by the European Commission, and if you see that a big part of what you uh, inserted in those public consultations is taken actually for impact assessments of proposals, that might be a successful campaign. Then for external purely communications, to know whether it was successful, I in most of my time is whether other stakeholders, civil society, NGOs, represented here in Brussels or in the EU capitals, actually react to your work. And sometimes the biggest proof that you did your job well is if your competitors react. If you see that your competitor jumps, that means probably that you touched the nerve and that you did well.
And actually, when it comes to campaign strategy, assessing competitors is another very interesting issue, because sometimes I'm sure you also know this from your experience. You have competitors that are other associations where one of your members can be also a member, but with a different division of their business. So how do you approach how to do it well? How to assess who's your competitor and who's your who you can form an alliance with? Is maybe it's something that you have to review every now and then, because it's a dynamic changing landscape. How do you see this, Álvaro?
Well, this when you have to represent the interests of some few thousand businesses, you keep them in mind above everything else. You try to make sure that the European legal framework allows them keep their business open, to compete fairly, to be able to deliver good products in short time, in proximity, with lowest ecological impact as possible, and with the best price possible for the final consumer. And then there's challenges, external and internal, coming to the industry, and you just join forces with the people that share the challenges, and you make the best effort as possible to obtain the desired result. It's like in the past. I mean, yeah, maybe uh, in a century, Spain and France used to be enemies, but then if the United Kingdom became a common enemy, they would join forces. So you, at the end of the day, need to work for the interests of these incredible businesses, and um, and sometimes it's not only, of course, de facto beneficial that they join forces in national associations and the national associations join forces to form European associations, but also that instead of one European association, when you have in the aftermarket 10, 12 European associations, of course, when you go talk to policymakers, that makes a huge difference. And yeah, many of the challenges the automotive distributors face are similar to what is presented for other associations in this industry and in others. So yeah.
And how do you stay on top of information, on top of things? How do you stay well informed? What news do you read? Or maybe also, I would love to ask you, what categories of information are you trying to stay on top on daily or weekly basis?
Well, of course, when you work in in such an association with so many implications coming implications to the industry coming from a wide range of legislation, whether it's competition, whether it's sustainability, cybersecurity, data, of course, design protection. You need to of course have intelligence tools that provide you on a daily basis or regular basis with all of the content that comes from the European institutions affecting the industry. You need to follow the specialist press, both in Brussels and in the capitals. You need to follow the different stakeholders engaged in in these issues. So it's necessary that you keep your sources as wide as possible. But of course, at the end of the day, you have only so much time to read and to follow with our team. So we also need to select quality information. So I would say media is important, but you need to have some kind of intelligence tool that also helps you identify easily. Okay, this is significant. This not. In a in a nutshell, you can have in the morning all of the relevant or potentially relevant information identified.
And who would you recommend to follow in the Spanish politics? We just started the Spanish presidency a couple
Mhm.
of days ago with this wonderful new logo combining the colors of the European and Spanish flags. So I think it's a good moment to actually look for some people who can give us a better insight to the Spanish politics. Who would you recommend to follow to be well informed about what's going on in the Spanish politics, especially that we are also facing the general election in a moment.
Well, that's the thing. I can recommend you a bunch of them if you speak Spanish, especially I would say, for example, if you want to follow politics, Spanish politics. Carlos Alsina, who is one of the main radio presenters in Spain. He's the perfect morning opener, and he's really great journalist. He's really neutral, and he follows really the key issues. But then, of course, I understand that most of our listeners would not speak Spanish. So if you want to follow Spanish politics in English, I would say there's a bunch of correspondence, but I can recommend in particular Sarah Morris from France 24. She was last year or a couple of years ago named best foreign correspondent in Madrid.
Yeah,
And
I actually
from a
follow her.
more, yeah, she's really great. And from a more academical perspective, I would say maybe someone like Federico Steinberg. He's a researcher in the biggest Spanish think tank, Real Instituto Elcano, and he always tweets in English. So Federico Steinberg can be also a big one, especially, for example, now that we have the Spanish presidency, he can cover it really well. From time to time, he also does it in English. Nacho Torreblanca, another academic. But yeah, there's plenty. But of course, depends on what you are interested in, but not that many actually cover Spanish politics in English. That's the
That's
issue.
why I'm asking this question, because I did some research myself and I couldn't find many interesting sources. There are a lot of course,
Mm.
Spanish sources, but for people like me. But yeah, I mean, you have this experience of now working for a couple of years in the EU bubble already. Previously, also in the Spanish politics. Um, could you point out some interesting differences between how politics is done in the EU bubble and in the Spanish politics?
Yeah, well, of course there's similarities, but I think the differences are huge, tremendous. I mean, obviously the first and probably the most significant one is that the process itself it's completely different. I think in comparison with any other European country or even almost every country in the world. Brussels is peculiar. The European Union is peculiar in the sense that the monopoly of the legislative initiative is on the European Commission hand, on the executive power, which is usually not the case in the rest of the political systems, where the legislative branch is the one who most of the time has the legislative initiative. Actually, in Spain, for example, it is considered really negative if the executive power, if the government takes a lot of legislative initiative instead of letting the parliament do this job. So that's of course here there's an exception, which is the citizen legislative initiative, but that happens very rarely in European Union. So most of the time is the Commission. So it's a very how to say it's a very reactive system in which you of course you cooperate with the Commission and the Commission has a long-term agenda and they identify most of the time the right issues, but it is you depend on blocks of let's say executive powers that come every 5 years to deliver what they think is the priorities and it's a very reactive way I guess of doing politics. And then of course you have the co-decision system, which of course you have bicameral systems like in Spain, Senate, Congress, and then you would say okay I have also two legislators like here Parliament and Council, but it's way different because you never have, for example, you don't have unanimity in Spanish politics. Of course, here even if there's more and more qualified majority voting systems in the council, you need to go and address many national interests, very different from a very wide range of political families. So it's much more complex. At the same time, it's probably more interesting. The other big difference I would say is that in general, national politics are much more covered by the national media and they're much more screened and followed by the citizens, which is good and bad at the same time in the sense that it is a pity that here the coverage of the biggest European media outlets of European issues is still quite little and also the interest of the citizens. But at the same time, it allows also policymakers in the EU to do things a little bit less stressed and carried on by public opinion, if you know what I mean. So it's quite a different environment, in my opinion. It has nothing to do, of course, at the end of the day, it's legislation and it has similarities, but they're two very different worlds with pros and cons.
If I would ask you to name one most typical thing that distinguishes the Spanish political culture in Europe, what would that be?
Huh. One thing that distinguishes Spanish political, well, I would say that maybe it's not only Spain. I would say it's an Iberian thing. Spain and Portugal that you are familiar with. Um, the Iberian Peninsula, although until the late 70s was under two uh, authoritarian regimes, I would say it's probably the lighthouse of progressiveness in Europe, especially the speed they went through to go with many of the social issues and policies. Everything is, I think, much more progressive or progressist in Spain and Portugal. I think that the political discourse is much more dominated by left wing or progressive ideology and trends that probably the rest of Europe. I would say that's and in a very natural way. What am trying to say is that it doesn't only affect the left parties; it affects all parties, and I think that the level of tolerance, open mind societies. I think it's something to be proud of in the sense that our societies in very short time progress so much more than other countries that were democracies with consolidated separation of powers and liberties and free media. So I think it's a really nice particularity. I don't know what that come from, but I think our societies are really yeah progressive in the good sense of the term.
Yeah, that I think that it resonates also with my observations. But now I prepared a very practical, probably the most practical question of this interview, and that is, where do you go to get proper, good Spanish cuisine in Brussels? What are your recommendations on this,
Oh,
Alvaro?
well, I don't want to. I want to be safe here because there's many little tapas bars and stuff like that. In Brussels, in particular, there's a little Asturian community that came in the 60s. So that's, I would say, the biggest minority or Spanish minority in Brussels. So there's a lot of little bars from people from Asturias, which is a little region in the north of Spain. Um, but to me, the Jew, the jewel of the crown, it's Hispania. It's a nice restaurant in Sablon with really great Spanish cuisine with Michelin chefs. So it's that would be my biggest recommendation. That's really it feels like
And
being
what's
home.
the dish you would recommend, if you have
Ooh,
any special choice?
fish. You know, in Spain and Portugal, we love fish, and that's a really great place to eat good fish.
Okay, that's definitely something to try out. And my last question that I ask also most of the guests, because we are now in a very interesting time with a lot of technological advancements speeding up. What are your fears and expectations, Alvaro, when it comes to how technology on one hand helps communication professionals, but on the other hand makes the work much more challenging, requiring to learn new things.
Mm.
What do you think? What should we expect from the future as communications professionals?
I mean, if I've seen something in this past decade is that you cannot consider yourself an expert in digital communications at all. It's constantly evolving. You need to continue training yourself. You need to be learning from best practices. Keep an eye open on new trends, on new platforms, on new solutions. So that's of course absolutely critical. But also technology is now bringing some challenges. I would say already today, maybe not the biggest concern for organizations such as mine, but for many of the organizations and public institutions in the European Union, I think one of the biggest challenges or threats it's fake news and disinformation and all of these confusion campaigns that are much easier to be driven by if you have technological tools. I think we are correctly addressing this issue. I think, of course, sometimes you made little mistakes and step backs, but I think we're little by little getting to a safer and and more healthy digital sphere in Europe. Uh, Once again, in that Europe is leading the way in the world, but that remains a big threat, especially when people tend to leave or stop consuming traditional journalism and put their hopes in being informed in social media and basic and very primer communication methods. So it's very very important that we make sure that is a safe environment, a rich environment, and uh, we cultivate our citizens. And then, of course, the elephant in the room is artificial intelligence. I think it will be more an advantage than a threat for us. I know there's already implementations, practical implementations of artificial intelligence in communications that are really great, especially in this field that I was talking about before, such as microsegmentation. There's already many consultancies and companies offering services with artificial intelligence to really determine, address, and fine tune your campaigns with microsegmentation to optimize the investment, the resources, and the time you put into it. Um, yeah, so I think that is the big phenomenon. Of course, that would impact some jobs. Um, Maybe, probably first it will be translators and then maybe communications officers. But I don't think it's going to destroy all of our jobs of comms officers and comms people in Brussels. And on the other hand, I think it's going to help us deliver much more successful campaigns. And I think that is, of course, the biggest one in the next couple of years. But then, who knows? In 3 4 years, we might have a new dominating social platform that changes the playing field again. You really need to get your eyes open and and wait for the things to evolve and adapt.
I'm definitely in the group of people who are never excited about a new platform launching because that just means more work,
Yeah,
and it just makes things more complicated. So, but yeah, I mean, we will definitely see how things evolve. And with this, I would like to thank you for your time, Alvaro. Alvaro de la
it was a
Cruz
pleasure.
was our guest today, head of communications of FIGIEFA. So thank you very much, Alvaro, for all the insights that you shared, the interesting take also on Spanish politics, and the absolutely insider information about where to get the good Spanish food.
Sure thing. It was a pleasure, Christoph. Anytime.
So thank you, and thanks everyone for listening to our conversation, to watching. A new episode, of course, will come out next week. And for today, that's all. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Cheers.